We live in a society. It's a popular meme made especially popular in the Joker film, although apparently it does not have its origin in the Joker film. Nonetheless, the Joker film was responsible for spreading the meme, we live in a society, and people joke about it. And memes, by their very nature, are things that people only partially take seriously, and yet memes, at the same time, also encapsulate certain kernels of truth, even ground truths, if you will. And the thing about the meme, we live in a society, is there are things about the meme that are true. What am I referring to here? Let's go back to the video where I talked about the nature of constraint and freedom. Because I advocate this view, after years of observing human beings, that ultimate freedom is not to be found in the ability to do anything you want, but rather in the ability to do things that are beneficial to you, that nonetheless fall within the parameters of some basic constraints placed upon you. And a lot of people bristle at this idea, and I noticed a bunch of people in the comment section did as well. And I want to clarify that when I'm talking about constraints, I'm almost entirely, well, not entirely, almost entirely talking about cultural constraints. Because cultural constraints give you the guidelines that people need by which they live and by which they can really go about their lives in a functional manner. And the thing I think that was lost on many people, unfortunately, was that you can look at the way society these days is falling apart and see that much of the reason why it's falling apart is because these cultural guidelines, which serve to provide constraints to the average person, are no longer in place and no longer in effect. And we could explore the notion of freedom in a kind of socio-political manner. Why not? Because, to my view, true freedom is going to be somewhat constrained. You could have a completely free society, but that wouldn't really be a society anymore, because you have to think about what people mean by free. So, a society or a world where anything goes, you can steal, you can kill, you can punish people indiscriminately, you can do whatever you want to people, would also be basically more freedom than we have now. There's nothing constraining. You can do whatever you want to anyone you want. I think a lot of people would describe that more as chaos rather than as freedom. Even the most hardcore libertarians, because many of them believe, for example, in the non-aggression principle. Okay. So ultimate freedom can't be found in the ability to do whatever you want, because if we had that, it would be chaos. It wouldn't be freedom. And if you think about how a lot of things work in the world, things are predicated on contrast. Without light, there can be no dark, or for that matter, no shadows. And so the contrast of absolute chaos, where you can literally do anything you want, and this is probably the most important point, be subjected to things you don't want, and be subjected to anything other people want to do to you, is definitely not freedom in most people's eyes. Now, once you move away from that notion of pure chaos is not freedom, then you get a lot of disagreement. Some people want a lot of constraints, whether governmental or cultural, and some people want a lot fewer of these constraints. But nonetheless, the reality is most of us agree that we need some kind of constraints, even if they're minimal. Like, don't steal, don't kill, don't enter into other people's property unannounced, whatever they might be. All these things are in place for a reason. And what I was talking about in that other video was the fact that there are broad swaths of society, the average person, that are suffering immensely because of a lack of constraints, a lack of regulation in their own lives, in largest measure because they are not in a position to impose regulation on their lives. They need some kind of external force to do that. Now, depending where you come from, and you know my position by now, I don't think human beings have any real sense of agency. These people will inevitably flounder if the amount of constraints placed upon them regulation, if you will, cultural regulation, primarily. With nothing to look up to, with nothing to guide them, they will flounder, and then you end up in a situation such as the crisis of single mothers, or the opiate crisis. Now, to be fair, in the case of the opiate crisis, there are some nefarious actors involved, and this is related to what I'm talking about. I've talked a lot about noblesse oblige, and the notion that a lot of people in quote-unquote society need guidance from on high. And without that guidance, they will fail. They will not do well. So, we have this meme, we live in society. And a lot of people's attitude is, well, what does it matter? People should take responsibility for themselves. That's an entire can of worms unto itself. But everyone should be able to do whatever they want, within reason, right? Almost nobody advocates for pure chaos, as in no constraints whatsoever. But people should be able to wine and dine at McDonald's every day, get really fat, and die of diabetes. No problem. They should be able to lose themselves in drugs because it's quote-unquote their choice. Obviously, it's difficult to avoid the conversation of how much choice they really have because, again, individuals vary vastly in terms of their genetic makeup and, most importantly, the random events that are imposed upon them. But let's set that aside for now and just imagine what it would be like as we live in a society when half of your society, 60% of your society, 70% falls by the wayside and they become drug addicts, alcoholics, or even worse. At that stage, when more than half of your society is no longer competent to regulate their own lives and lead quote-unquote productive lives, where they're not harming anyone, and most importantly, perhaps not harming themselves, you don't really have a society anymore. Not really. There's a threshold, right? If it's only 10% of those individuals, 20, 30, you can sort of still have a society. I'll admit that. At some point in time, what we call society, a kind of social agreement we have, doesn't work anymore because all those people are out to lunch. All those people have lost the capacity to function. They're far too dysregulated, and society itself, which is composed of many bits and parts, the smartest people, but also the mailman delivering the post, or the truck drivers, or even the people that clean the toilets and the bathrooms. If all that falls apart, you don't have a society anymore. And then you actually lose the ability to say, we live in a society. Now, you could have some semblance of something after that. If 60, 70% of your quote-unquote society has bitten the dust, so to speak, not in the sense that they've all died off, but have become so dysregulated, so out to lunch, so out there, it no longer works. It always reminds me, and I hate to bring this up yet again, of this film, which is not very good, Elysium, Matt Damon stars in it. But the premise is there. These elites living in the stratosphere, far removed from Earth, they can cure any illness, they live really long, healthy lives versus the groundlings, the people stuck on Earth, living lives of poverty, misery, and general suffering. And yeah, you could do that. It's kind of like the Peter Thiel has a mansion in the South Island of New Zealand in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, that could work, sort of. But it's not the premise for a civilization, and certainly not for a functional one. And so, a lot of the onus here is on quote-unquote elites, people who should know better, and more importantly, should do better. The fact that the opiate crisis was created by a pharmaceutical company with no attention paid to the potential consequences of using certain drugs, and almost certainly for the sole reason of making a profit, whether or not these opiates actually help people in the correct application of the opiates or not, with additional side effects, and let's be perfectly honest, proper drug addiction, the fact that pharmaceutical companies, and one in particular, has been indifferent to that is a problem. And so, when I say we live in a society, it's not just about the middle and lowest rungs of society not doing their part, or rather being incapable of doing their part, but the upper rungs of society that should be doing better and are visiting a great injustice upon people that, if we're perfectly honest, ought to depend on them. because people, especially average people, need guidance. They need regulation in their lives. If they don't have it, we can look at the landscape as it exists today, and you can see what's happening. Dysfunctional marriages, single mothers running around, drug addiction, alcoholism, homelessness, self-deletion. The list is endless. And why does this happen? Because these people lack the ability to self-regulate. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's still their choice. Who cares what happens to them? It's not my responsibility. Sure, that is a point you can make if you believe in it, up until the limit where you don't even have a proper society anymore, because everyone's checked out in various ways. And so, yes, we live in a society is true to some degree. If more than half the people have checked out in various ways, you don't really have a functional society anymore, much less really a society. If the percentage goes beyond that, it's even worse. At the heart of this is this notion of human agency. If you really think your average person is this awesome wellspring of personal responsibility, people predictably took umbrage at my previous video where I stated that we're animals. Well, we are. And just like all animals, we respond to incentives, to different things, different stimuli. There's a reason why 100 years ago almost nobody was obese. The environment has changed. Wow, people respond to that in negative and destructive ways. And it's just an inescapable fact that even the best among us, and I don't count myself amongst the best, far from it, need some kind of regulation and guidance in our lives in order to live our lives in an adequate way. Without that, we're just lost at sea. And again, I enjoin you. Look at the landscape, particularly of American society these days, and tell me things are going really well. They're not. And what is the culprit here? Well, I'd say it's dysregulation, lack of guidance, and lack of constraints. We allow for almost anything. And in the anything goes society, what's going to happen? Well, quite literally, anything goes. And you end up with some truly horrific situations as a result of that. People need guidance, regulation, and they need constraints. Every one of us. If you don't want to live in a total state of chaos where anything goes and people can do anything to you, then you're going to agree at least on some base level. Well, take the argument a little further and recognize that we as human beings, and more specifically as human animals, need signals that help us along the path of life. And you can receive bad signals too, which lead to some of the scenarios I've already talked about, drug addiction, alcoholism, single motherhood, etc., etc. Or you can receive good ones. Most of the signals these days are quite bad. So yes, we actually sort of do live in a society. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for tuning in. Much appreciated. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon and my donors at PayPal. You guys are the best. Keep the channel alive and going. Without you, all would be dust and ash. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, I hear it helps. Who knows? Much appreciated. Until the next time, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.